Hello friends in Anatomy and Physiology class. This is Hassan Nafid, your Anatomy and Physiology instructor at Madison College in Wisconsin. This time I want to welcome you from Fort Atkinson campus in Wisconsin. We're going to talk about the respiratory system. In particular, we are going to look at the features and the anatomy of the lungs. I have preserved human lungs here that I want to share with you the features and the parts and the anatomy of the lungs. But before doing that, let's take a look and remind ourselves about the features, parts, and anatomy of the lungs in this model here. Taking a look at this model here, let me show you the parts of the upper airways. This is the upper airways. This is a trachea, start from here and almost goes down here. This is the thyroid cartilage. There is thyroid gland here. This is a part of the trachea shown here, and it goes in the back of the great vessels. This is the mediastinum. This area is known as the mediastinum, between the two lungs, where you find the heart, the great vessels, and the trachea and the esophagus behind it. These are the two lungs, right lung and left lung. I wanted you to notice, right lung has three lobes, upper, middle, and inferior lobe. And there is two fissures that separate these lobes in the right lung. This is the transverse or horizontal fissure. This is the oblique fissure. On the left side, if you see, there is only two lobes, upper lobe and inferior lobe or lower lobe. And there is one fissure, that's an oblique fissure. This is known as the cardiac notch. And this area is where the heart occupies this part of the lung. That's why or it explains also somehow that the right lung has three lobes while the left lung has two lobes. If you observe also on the bottom here, let me just put it up a little bit for you. We want to take a look at the diaphragm. This is the diaphragm, that line here. This is the diaphragm, and this is the main respiratory muscle. The diaphragm is supplied by the phrenic nerves, or the phrenic nerve, and the diaphragm descends down during inspiration. So when the lungs expands during inspiration, it descends down, and this is with the help of the diaphragm. This is a preserved right human lung. If you take a look at that, here is the apex, and this is the base. There is three lobes. This is the upper lobe, middle lobe, and lower lobe. And these are the fissures. This is the transverse fissure. Let me open it a little bit for you. You can see it and turn it around here. It separates the upper lobe from the middle lobe. And the lower part, you will find the oblique fissure. This is the oblique fissure. Let me hold it like that. And here you are going to see the oblique fissure. And the oblique fissure separates the lower lobe from the middle lobe. So right lung, three lobes, two fissures. If we turn it to the medial side, we'll find the hilum. This area is known as the hilum, and the hilum is the area where structures leaves and comes to the lung. What comes to the lungs are the pulmonary vessels, pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, and also what comes also are the parts of the bronchial tree. And here we're talking about the two primary bronchi. On the right side, we have the right main bronchus, which divides into secondary bronchi and tertiary and then terminal bronchi. So right lung, take a look at these structures. The pleura is this shiny membrane that helps the lungs lobules to stay in place. I can tell you also there is a little puncture here that happened accidentally, probably, on the lungs, and it shows you parts of the pleura, which is, in this case, the visceral pleura. The parietal pleura is that part of the pleura which is attached to the thoracic cavity. Again, this is another model of the right lung. Also, apex, or apex, base of the lung, upper lobe, middle lobe, and lower lobe, and the fissures. This is the transverse fissure, or you can call it horizontal fissure. Let me hold it like that so you see exactly what it does. It separates the upper lobe from the middle lobe and partially here from the lower lobe, while the horizontal fissure on the other side separates the lower lobe from the middle lobe and partially from the upper lobe. If you go to the posterior back of the lungs, you see the lungs occupies most of the posterior part of the thoracic cavity. That makes sense. Also, examination of the lung is really better obtained in the posterior part. This is part of the pleura here. Here we will see the trachea. This is a good model here. It's a good specimen where the trachea is preserved. Now take a look at this here. This is the trachea divided into main bronchi, right main bronchus, and left main bronchus. The left main bronchus is cut short here. Pay attention to something here. If you see the right main bronchus is kind of straighter and a little wider, and that what makes the right lung more susceptible to aspiration pneumonia more than the right lung. Also, take a look at the hilum here. This is the hilum where structures come to the lung. And if you go down here, you will identify the secondary bronchi. So the main bronchus, right main bronchus or right primary, these are the secondary. And if you go a little bit more, you will see the tertiary smaller bronchioles that goes into each one of these lobes. And the back here will identify the esophagus, and the esophagus runs on the posterior part of the lung, because if you take a look at it, this is the anterior part. It looks like that. This is the anterior actually, and this is a posterior part. So it's kind of behind it, or it is situated posterior to the trachea. Another specimen here showing you the left lung this time. As you see, there is only two lobes, upper and lower, and there is one fissure, and this is the oblique fissure. Left lung with the apex, with the base, with the upper lobe, lower lobe, and oblique fissure. If we turn to this side, you're going to find our cardiac notch here. This is the cardiac notch area because, as you see, we have the heart also with this model. The heart is in this model. It is shown here in this specimen with the lung. So this is the cardiac notch where the heart is coming in close relationship to the left lung. Also, observe or look at the aorta, the big artery. That's the largest artery that comes out of the heart, left ventricle, and it divides into its branches. Take a look at it. You got the brachiocephalic, you got the coronary, common carotid, and the subclavian. So this is the aorta, aortic arch, brachiocephalic, common carotid, and left subclavian. Taking a look at the side here, you're gonna see the hilum again with the structure that coming into the lungs. Mainly we're gonna talk about pulmonary vessels, pulmonary artery, and pulmonary vein. These are parts of the pulmonary trachea. I could tell because the wall is really thinner and less elastic and more relaxed than the aorta. And that tells me this is a pulmonary vessels. Also, take a look at parts of the tracheas here. This is the trachea. It's kind of opened to show you. If you take a look at the trachea here, let me bring this camera a little bit closer to you. Bring the specimen a little bit closer to you. You can take a look at the trachea here. And the trachea is kind of open in the back, showing the trachea rings. Take a look at them here. Tracheal rings. And the upper airways, very interesting here to look at the epiglottis. This is the opening of the trachea here, and this is the epiglottis. It's a fold or a flap of elastic cartilaginous tissues that will close the trachea upon the swallowing. Behind it, you're going to find the esophagus here. I'm going to put this type. The prop is right here, and this goes into the esophagus. This is showing the esophagus here. So when we swallow, this esophagus, it's a tube right there. So when we swallow, so the food is directed to the esophagus right here. This is open as the esophagus. See, the prop is inside the esophagus rather than going into the trachea because of the help of the epiglottis, which closes or kind of go this way and closes the tracheal entry, so food does not get into the airways and prevent aspiration. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you in another session. Greetings from Fort Atkinson.